Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes, and I have Stephen Hodge with me here in the studio. Stephen's from WeRide. I am here on Gubbi Gubbi country in Caboolture as usual. And Stephen, perhaps you could tell me a little bit about which country you're on and how did you become interested in riding bikes and where are you? And let's just start the conversation.
Yeah, love to, Wendy. I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri lands, Canberra. I have a long background in cycling, starting when I was at uni doing a science degree. Started competing. Before that, I'd been touring with school groups, had a career overseas for many years, came back, and rather than the sporting cycling side, got very interested in the transport, how it makes a difference to people's lives. From then, managed to be employed by WeRide Australia. It was called the Cycling Promotion Fund at the time, to establish a national federal government relations program for cycling. That is to get cycling a seat at the federal policy table, federal government table. That's what I have been doing for around 15 years now.
Well, you are my hero, I have to say, because what I often find is that people are really into the sort of lean machine cycling. We have a rail trail quite near us and people love the rail trail, but there is this sort of lean machine experience that can be challenging. I have a feeling it's because people are bending down and they're quite hard to access. The minute they set up, it's quite a different experience. So I think that's the difference between the transport and the cycling and the sport. Thank you very much for being so actively engaged, because I think it was probably a couple of years ago when you were doing your science degree, and for taking that further on and working at a national level. It's exactly what we need here on the outskirts, because we have really poor bus service and they keep going, oh, well, it's too expensive. Everyone drives. It's just not true. And we really need your work to help us.
What's often forgotten, Wendy, is that just in the adult population, around 20% of all adults do not have a driving license, so they can't drive. It's not an option for them, whether that's by choice, exclusion, or through disability. And when you add in the other little people that we all know and love who have to be driven to school and stuff, it ends up being around 40% of Australians do not have an option to drive a car. So it's a real equity and accessibility issue in the transport system that we're also talking about. And the cost of transport, owning a car, is phenomenal, and it's just going through the roof. So the real opportunity is that of all the trips that Australians do every day, so that's for all purposes, around a half are 5 kilometres or less. Around a third are just 3 kilometres or less. Now, these are distances that can be cycled easily without stress or strain in 10 to 20 minutes, often as quick as driving by the time you're not needing to look for a car park. So the real opportunity here is that we know Australians want to have that option, but they don't because we haven't provided the appropriate infrastructure, so that it's all very well for type A men like myself to be able to choose cycling, but we're not the people that matter. I'm not the person that matters. The person that matters is the mum who has kids that need to get to school. The person is an older Australian who needs to or wants to go and meet their friends at the local shops. There are real issues around how we're planning our mobility systems, right? Transport systems. These are wonderful problems to have because there's so much opportunity, but it does get a little bit depressing sometimes when we have this idea in our heads that cars are what everyone needs. Well, sorry, they're not all the time what we all need.
Thanks for that. Just about that 4 in 10 figure. So when I look at the demographic here in Caboolture, in Moreton Bay, we're actually at the second centile for social disadvantage. That's the CIFA ERSAD technical term for it. So for our listener, they may not be aware of this. There is an organisation called Profile ID, and they produce figures for Moreton Bay Council. There's a whole lot of economic information and where do people live and what sort of house they're in, where is the job and what are the transport options. This is information that council uses. And one of those is a Australian Bureau of Statistics figure, an ABS figure, called the CIFA ERSAD figure. And that's a compilation of a range of things like your education level, your income, your housing stability, how many connections to wealthy people do you have. It's a complex web. And that one is called the CIFA ERSAD. And so that's a social disadvantage score. And we're in the second centile here in Caboolture for Moreton Bay. So that's just a Moreton Bay figure.
You're saying that people in your area are doing it tougher than a lot of other people in Australia.
I'm saying certainly in relation to the Moreton Bay region, and I think Moreton Bay has higher rates of poverty. 4 in 10 people, I think it's a bit higher. I say it's about 4.5 out of 10. You can't chop somebody in half. So I say around 1 in 2 people, because a lot of people don't want to drive either. And a lot of people maybe shouldn't be driving. We have a lot of seniors who feel uncertain or they have a license and then their kids, they're our age, the kids, and they're going, I don't think you should be driving. Yeah, I'm going to drive. So there is that figure as well. So I include that.
Problem is, you can't be what you can't see. So people are saying, oh no, I want to keep driving because they don't see what the options are. And arguably, the options aren't being provided for them. And the great thing about what we're talking about is getting around on 2 wheels or 3 wheels or 4 wheels using your own steam or an electric assisted bike, is that providing for that type of transport costs orders of magnitude less than creating roads. So economically, it's a fabulous argument. Economically, communities and councils would be a lot better off financially if they made it easier for their residents to be able to ride, right? And the other thing that happens is it keeps people active and mobile. And we know, and especially when we're talking about our parents and other older people, we know that staying active and socially connected is what keeps them alive and healthy and happy. There could be no better story, let alone making it possible for our kids to walk and ride to school again because they've got safe paths and the parents are happy to let their kids ride to school. You know what I mean?
Are you part of any bike bus schemes? If you are, perhaps you could describe what a bike bus scheme is, or if you aren't, some other ways if bike buses aren't working, what would you suggest?
There are 2 ways that getting kids walking and riding can work. The first is that groups of interested parents and teachers get together and they look at where the kids are coming from each day. And the catchments for primary schools, generally 80% of kids are within a 2K radius of the school. A bike bus is when you get the parents and they're supported and they tell all the parents, we're going to start at this point here, A, we're going to go via B and Z at these times, and we're going to arrive at school at 8:30, whatever. And then parents suddenly know that there are responsible parents and they do it on a roster, so no one has to do too many. Then the parents of all the kids know that, okay, we can get our kids to walk out the front door and join the walking school bus or go out of their front door on their little bikes and join the bicycle bus and be guided to school by responsible adults. So that's one fabulous way that globally around the world is happening now, right? And kids love it. They're all together and they're chatting and they're being corralled along safe infrastructure on the way to school. The second thing, and we have a trial that's wrapped up on the Sunshine Coast called Ride Score Active Schools, and we got federal funding, state funding, Sunshine Coast Council funding and developer funding to develop a scheme whereby the kids' bikes have a little beacon, a little sort of electronic transmitter, and there's a reader in the school bike cage. The parent has an app on their phone. They get a direct message when their child arrives at school, and they get another direct message when their child leaves school, right? So they have that confidence to know that their child has arrived and they know when they've left so that they know that they should be home in X minutes. Suddenly, parents get an hour back in their day. They don't have to fight the traffic mayhem around schools. What we've got is we've got incentives for the kids so that the more trips they do, they reach certain milestones and they'll get a movie voucher. They'll get recognised at school assembly. They'll get a family voucher when they do even more trips, and there's a leaderboard and they're all all desperately battling to be at the top of the leaderboard. So we've got some incentives for the kids. And then council starts to understand what happens when they fill the gaps in the network so that there is a continuous safe pathway for kids to come to school, and they can address the gaps that exist, because they say, well, why aren't kids coming from the western side of whatever school it is? So they can address the infrastructure needs. We've seen 55% increase in riding amongst the participants of this scheme, and will now look at pushing it out further to other states and other areas. The Sunshine Coast Council's been inundated with more schools who would like to participate. Parents love it, kids love it, and the councillors are going along to the school assemblies and seeing how animated the kids are about this, and they're getting on board. So it's really been a fantastic trial. We'll be publishing an evaluation report by Deakin Uni in the near future. These are some of the ways that we can change the game. 40 years ago, 70% of us used to walk and ride to school, and now 70% of our kids are driven to school. Schools are terribly afraid of the traffic situation at drop-off and pick-up times. It's mayhem. Parents go a bit feral, I think, and kids arrive. There are less behavioural problems at school. They learn better. What we're seeing is that physical activity like this is almost better than dedicated literacy and numeracy additional classes, right? So establishing healthy habits for kids for the future. Once kids start riding to school, whole families go and buy bikes because the kids love riding so much. There are lots of ways we can change the game for our local transport. What better way than to start with our kids?
I'm totally on board. Get Around has tried a number of different approaches to try and get parents on board and to reach out to the community, but I haven't had any luck. So if a listener is a parent, maybe in the PNC, or, I have one parent who would love to be able to do it, but she actually can't ride and she's in the middle of moving house and all sorts. She said, I can't take on one more thing. Parents are so flat out with just trying to organize life that to be part of something like this, particularly we're in a low income area, as I mentioned, many of the schools around here are, have parents with low incomes, and we don't have good footpath infrastructure. How can we do it? How can our listener get something like that happening?
In each state and territory, there are really experienced bicycle organisations that often know all of the state members and engage with them. In Queensland, Bicycle Queensland, I would suggest should be contacted, should be the first point of contact. I know that just ahead of the last local government elections, the new CEO, Alton Twine, did a sort of a speaking and listening tour to every local government area. And the chair of that organisation is actually a past Transport Minister for Queensland, Rachel Nolan. So she's obviously extremely knowledgeable. I would say that there are very likely to be resources and support for parents who want to do a walking school bus or a cycling school bus who can engage with the council themselves. Now, the councils always have officers, policy and local activity officers who would be also the first point of contact at council. You would need to talk to the principal. If you have children at a school and you believe it would be great to organise to get more kids walking or cycling to school, you need to talk to the school. But you're right, there are some problems if there aren't safe paths and crossings to get into the school. So then the parents should be looking at the planning that's coming up and what the plans are for council works. And if there isn't a safe way into the school by walking or cycling, really, I think there's a very good argument for parents who live in a certain council area to say, we want our kids to be able to walk safely. What are you planning in terms of the paths that we need, that our kids need? Councils are there to serve the residents. All councils make decisions about how they spend a lot of money, which is your rates. Therefore, if you feel your rates aren't being spent in ways that really benefit the local community, the health of the kids, your health, and just reducing transport congestion. I should point out that the Ride School program on the Sunshine Coast that's been run by fantastic council officers in Colleen Penny and Nigel Walker and Kari up on the Sunshine Coast. That is funded out of their transport levy, which is all about reducing congestion, about reducing traffic. So there are ways of funding these things that are available to councils if they believe it. Now, if they don't really understand it, well, then someone could talk to Sunshine Coast, get some tips, and then go to whoever's in your area around Caboolture.
Just for our listener, I want to just mention this. Perhaps this might be of interest to you too, Stephen. We had someone on the show recently called Rachel Gallagher. She's got a planning background, and she actually set up a survey for parents to find out what are the barriers that they encounter. I put it up on the website.
Well, good on Rachel. And I'll just quickly make a comment about that. Often council only hears a few loud voices. I can remember when my kids were in primary school, we all knew each other because we're so involved in the school, right? If you and some of the other parents know that more of you would like to walk, often, unless you do something like a survey, the results of which can then be presented to council, the council may not actually realise how much support there is for people who want to walk and ride more. And it's often the way, this is what people don't realise. If council isn't doing what you think's important, they simply may not realise how many of you want to walk and ride more. So Rachel's idea about this survey is great. So good on you if you post it.
The other thing is I wanted to let our listener know that council does have an Access Schools program. You said a transport levy. I wanted to know, was that council funding or state or federal? What was that transport levy for congestion?
That is a Sunshine Coast Council levy, which they invest to make it easier to get around the Sunshine Coast Council area. The other thing that are available to councils are many funding programs. So one of the ways that they put the icing on the cake, if you like, for the schools that wanted to run this Ride School program is they then access Transport and Main Roads State Transport Department funding for things like upgraded bike cages and crossings. So there are small infrastructure granting programs that council can then access when it's in support of things that are going to get more people walking and riding. They are specifically for that. So council has available additional funding. If they take on a riding bus or a walk or ride to school program, there are likely many different ways that they can fund little extra bits like a signalised crossing with lights so the kids can get safely across the busy road out the front of school or whatever. Or a bit of a path, there's no link, they're missing a link somewhere of a few hundred metres. There are programs that councils can access with estate departments to get those bits of infrastructure or a great lockable bike cage or something.
So I've spoken with council several times. They say, we don't have money to do this. This is something we get the developers to do. But a lot of places have already been developed. Yesterday I was speaking with a mum and she said, my kids so desperately want to be able to ride to school, but there are no footpaths. It's absolutely terrifying. There's no way. And I think they must live quite a way out. There is space on the verge, but on the road it's, 100 kilometres an hour or something like that.
Where there's a will, there's a way. I know that other paths are done through some of the green areas of some of the councils that I've visited through their environmental investment programs. There are many, many ways. First, if a council's saying, we don't have money for paths, well, I would question that. Are they spending money on roads? Of course they are. Are they spending money on improving parking around the shopping precincts? Of course they are. To say that there is no money for footpaths, that's simply a matter of planning and priority. Normally they've also got a strategic walk-in cycling program, like a strategy. One of the other facts that is really important to emphasise is that of all trips done every day in Australia, there are 76 million trips a day in Australia for all purposes, right? That was pre-COVID. I don't know what it is post-COVID. A third of trips only are trips to work. 20% are trips to education and school, and 50% are all other trips, local shopping trips, visiting friends, freight, and so on. If a council is focusing on the roads to get people to work, that's only a third of all trips. There are good arguments for prioritising investment in making it easier to walk and ride to school, because that will have a net positive impact on the roads by taking some cars off. That will make it easier for everyone who does need to drive.
I did see some research. It was about motorbikes, which said that if 10% of drivers become motorbike riders, that reduces congestion by 40%. I don't know how that works, but it must be some flow mechanism.
If you think about how incredibly good the roads are just in school holidays, everything moves better. It is a noticeable improvement in congestion when the school holidays are on. The number of cars that are reduced during school holidays is relatively small. It's only 7 to about 14% less cars on the road, and that makes a huge difference in and congestion. And that's why that figure you've just quoted about the motorbikes makes sense, because it takes only a small reduction in the numbers of cars at peak times. Don't forget, roads are designed for peak time, so the rest of the time they're way over scoped. January holidays is quite a big drop, but other school holidays, it's only about 7 to 12 or 14% drop in traffic, and it makes the roads move much better. All we have to do is get more kids walking and riding and alternatives. It's about giving people options. It's not about telling them to ride a bike. Well, not everybody wants to ride a bike. Of course they don't. You do happen to live in one of the best places in the world to ride a bike most of the year, can I just say? And if you don't like hills, I don't think you even have any hills in Caboolture, do you?
We actually don't.
There are a couple of things that are trending globally that make a really big difference. E-bikes change the game for people who were not otherwise considering riding. E-bikes provide the little bit of help you need, or the lot of help you need, you can adjust it, that makes a trip on two wheels hugely enjoyable and fun and appropriate. You got rockstar parking when you get where you want to go. You rock up to the front door and you prop your bike and lock it up and go and have your coffee with your friends, or go to the business meeting if it's not far away. And the push from the e-bike means that you don't get so sweaty, you don't have to work so hard, so you don't have so many of the problems that people complain about in our humid environment. It's a great option, and around the world, it's happening. People are investing in it because it makes economic sense.
Absolutely. I was really interested in the idea that only 30% of trips are to work. One of our listeners sent us some data from the TMR which showed the amount of spend. If this was in a year, you started on the 1st of January, car funding would be until the 1st of September, I think it was. Train funding would be from the 2nd of September up to the 20th of December. From the 21st of December up to the 31st of December, that is buses, bikes, footpaths, and ferries and anything else. And that just shows you the imbalance. Now, obviously, footpaths and bike paths are much, much cheaper. Bus service, they say, we haven't got money for a bus service. It doesn't make money. Well, neither do cars. Cars are terrible money.
So I have another interesting fact from Queensland, the most recent travel survey done by the government. We talk about the number of passengers carried each day, whether it's by whatever vehicle is, and we refer to that as passenger transport task, right? So 3%, I don't know about trains, but public transport by bus is 3% of all passengers carried every day. Bikes are now 2%, even in comparison with bus investment in bus lines and buses and infrastructure and dedicated busways if you're in the CBD. They're only carrying 3%. Bikes are carrying nearly as much, and they're getting funded much less. So there's a real equity problem there. And we know from national surveys that a lot more Australians would ride if the conditions were better. So if they had safe infrastructure, they didn't have to mix with high-speed traffic or with heavy vehicles. It's an opportunity made in heaven. An investment of a few percent extra of the transport budget could literally transform our towns and our communities and make them much quieter, safer, and much more enjoyable and healthy. Even on health and livability grounds, they're marvellous investments. The return for every dollar invested is about $5. No other transport project comes close to returning the investment to that level.
I have an e-bike and I go everywhere, and I go for my morning bike ride. This morning, for instance, there was a guy and he and I joined together, and I didn't know him, but I told him about Get Around. And we just rode together for about a kilometre, maybe half a kilometre, and just chatting. And I was telling him about Get Around, and then we separated. Now, I don't know his name. I don't know what he's interested in. He was on a bike. I have often these kind of very brief rides together where I just meet somebody and I say hello and we have a brief conversation. Often it's somebody I see regularly because there's so few people who ride bikes that I kind of know most of them, or many of them anyway. You gave a presentation at the Asia Pacific Bike Riding Conference in Brisbane earlier this year, and that's how I came across you. And now I come across your name in a couple of other webinars here and there, so it's very nice to have that regular contact. Was there anything you wanted to add from your presentation that would be appropriate for our local community here in Caboolture?
So, unbeknownst to most people, the cycling sector makes a very significant direct economic contribution to our GDP. Nationally, cycling and e-scooters contribute an estimated $18.6 billion to the national economy. And in Queensland, that figure is $3.2 billion. That's health, it's social and economic benefits. The cycling sector is about half the size of the Australian live music industry. It's bigger than the thoroughbred racing industry, and it's the same as the motorsport industry sector. It is a surprisingly important contributor economically, and not only that, it keeps people out of hospital. You don't have to ride much, and the report that we talked about in that meeting, the APCC you've mentioned, there is $1 billion of health benefits nationally, and that's from the people who are now riding. That's 3.3 million Australians each year. There are $1 billion in benefits measured in terms of people being healthier, therefore not presenting so often for disease, chronic heart conditions to hospitals and so on, and also mental health benefits and the value of life years gained. It's a medical measurement. It just means that generally people who ride above a certain number of times are healthier.
That's very interesting because for Australia, the figure for collisions is $30 billion a year. That's how much cars cost in terms of economic burden of collisions. The other one is road building is $30 billion. That's very interesting that $60 billion that it costs in both road building and health burden, that doesn't include chronic health disease.
And the really interesting thing about being physically active, like say from riding to your local shops or commuting to work, is that unlike losing weight, if you're a bit overweight, the riding has an immediate benefit on your health. It doesn't depend on you losing weight. The mere fact you're moving your body directly and immediately impacts with better health. So getting people doing 2 or 3 of their local trips a week has a net benefit to you personally, and of course then to our health budgets as well. It can delay the need for councils and state governments to build roads if we reduce congestions. It can cut down or delay, the need for investment. And the infrastructure needed to get a lot more people riding than are riding now is relatively cheap by at least an order of magnitude. That's cutting off a zero off the investment needed for roads to do bikeways. They're not always cheap, but they're much, much cheaper than cars for building roads.
What is something that you can give our listener to do as an idea, maybe if they don't have kids? So if they've got kids and they're wanting their kids to ride bikes, that's what they can do. But for another listener, what could you suggest that they could do to make the infrastructure better, to get bike riding, or what can you suggest?
Easy peasy. The one thing everyone must do if you're interested in being able to ride more easily, more often, is you must say that to your elected representative, the councillors in your council area, your local MP. You must say, I would like to ride more, but I can't because I don't have a safe way to do it. The one thing, tell your elected representatives, please make it easier for me. There are many of us who want to do this. We cannot because you're not providing us with the paths and the bikeways that would allow us to choose to ride a bike for our local trips.
That's really good because, as you said, there are a couple of voices that are always saying the same thing. And now when I try and contact anybody, I can sort of see their eyes glaze over because they know what I'm going to say. We've got a state election coming up and all our public transport tickets are going to be 50 cents, except on the air train, which I think is going to be 11, which is half price. So it's a really good opportunity to get out and be part of that. And in the first week of October, we're also going to be doing something called a week without driving. That's something for our listener.
Yeah, great ideas.
All right. So any final words that you would like to add, Stephen?
People that show up get heard. You can be Mr. Ordinary, Mrs. Ordinary. You don't need to be any special kind of person. You just need to ask questions and make it clear what you think is important in your local area. And seriously, areas where it's easier to walk and ride, they're much nicer. It benefits everyone, but especially it benefits our kids. It benefits the people that have problems getting around by car. And the world would be a better place if it was easier to walk and ride.
Absolutely. I have so much more that I want to ask, and I never got around to it because we ran out of time. We might have to have you back on the show, Stephen, to follow up the conversation.
Always happy to come back.
It was great. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.